As many of you know, I live out in the country. Last night there was an exceptionally clear sky, and I took the opportunity to stare up at the countless stars I could see. As I did this, I couldn't help but wonder what made humankind decide to link certain stars together to create constellations, and what made them believe that these celestial beings had messages to give us right here on Earth. I guess this was on my mind, as I knew I'd be speaking with my special guest, Elisabeth Grace, all about the wonders of astrology. Elisabeth is a noted astrologer who's lectured all over the world, creates workshops for corporate clients, and has her own podcast, Off the Charts, a stellar newscast, where she speaks all about how astrology can help us understand world events in the way the media can't or won't. Welcome to the Dream Power Show, Elisabeth.
Why, thank you. Welcome to you. What a lovely, warm introduction that was. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show.
Oh, it's my pleasure because I love to talk about astrology. And Elizabeth, you do say that astrology helps us understand why. Well, how can stars that are millions of miles away give us information we can't get elsewhere?
Wow. Why they do this, I do not know. That is a profound and deep question. However, I do know from studying them, as countless have before me, that the patterns above us from our perspective here on planet Earth, that's what we're talking about. The patterns of the planets from our perspective on planet Earth, for some reason, reflect patterns in life development. One of my mentors used to say, planets don't do anything. I tell my students and anybody who wants to know about astrology to think of astrology as a language. It's a language. And in Western astrology, which is the astrology I practice with, the symbols of the planets and the constellations are related to Greek and Roman mythology. So if you know your Greek and Roman mythology, and you know Mars is the god of war and Venus is the goddess of love, those are symbols, those are words, those are concepts in the language of astrology. And so what astrologers are doing, we have this symbolic language, which for some reason our ancestors looked up in the sky, observed these patterns, and gave them meaning. Like any other language. You think about this, you're going to blow your mind. Think about this. Where do languages come from? Who invented French? Is French any better than Chinese? But each language reflects the consciousness and the evolution of the people who create and use it. So what do you want to talk about? If you want to talk about something like snow, for example, are you going to learn Inuit or Swahili? You following me? If you're going to talk about snow, are you going to learn Inuit or Swahili?
Well, you've got to go to where the snow is.
You've got to go where the snow is. So then what does astrology as a language, what can we talk about? If you want to have a meaningful and profound discussion about human experience through space and time from our perspective on planet Earth, you want to speak astrology or speak to somebody who can translate this language into plain English so that you can understand the information it provides.
Okay, so you're talking about astrology as a language.
That's how, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And language has words that have specific meanings. But doesn't astrology have interpretations that go along with it? So it's not necessarily X means X and Y means Y.
Awesome question. The planetary patterns, the symbols that we've invested into these planets, the meaning that we've given them, they have an upside and a downside. If it's a positive or a negative. There's two ways, more than one expression of a particular sign. For example, okay, Mars, the god of war. Mars refers to how we need to take action. Courage is a really great thing to have if you need to be a hero. And we can look to Mars to understand how courageous you might be, given the potential we see in the horoscope. Mars also refers to anger. It's the same symbol with, multiple potential expressions. And so what astrologers are doing is, because we're not psychic, well, some of us are, but we don't claim to be psychic. That's not how we know, or we anticipate what's going to happen. We anticipate we look at the patterns in a horoscope or at any given moment in time. We assess the potential of expression, upside, downside, pleasant, unpleasant, courageous, warrior, whatever. And then we have to understand, like, for example, if I'm working with a client, I don't know how these particular patterns are manifesting in the unique personal world of my client. We have to put it in perspective from their experience. And then if I look at a horoscope as understand yourself through astrology, and you understand what you need in order to feel fulfilled. So many people, maybe they're raised by parents who wanted them to be a doctor, and they want it, whereas their child really wants to be a cellist. Okay. So they're going to med school, and then they go to an astrologer, and the astrologer says, so tell me about your creative interests. I mean, this is an extreme example, right? But they go, oh my God, you see this in me. You see that this is what I want to do. And I'm like, and I would be like, yeah, and this is what's fulfilling. So you need to integrate this in your life in order for you to be happy. When you know what people need in order to be fulfilled, astrologers are able to see how the patterns are continuously shifting. We can see into the future. We can see back into the past. We know when things were likely to have happened and what kind of things. And we know what's likely to happen based on what we understand about how somebody needs to be.
Okay, well, so
any questions?
Right. Oh, yeah.
Did I explain that?
Tons of questions, but I want to get into this whole topic of patterns and the patterns that
patterns.
And one of the things you talk about, and I believe you talk about this on your podcast, is the relationship between the planetary patterns and today's headlines.
Yes.
So how did the stars know this? How does that
how can we use this? Well, okay, well, the stars, first of all, the planets aren't stars. Okay. Yes. So it's just a symbolic language. And the answer to your question is like, why does astrology do this? I don't know. I have no idea. I know how it works based on years and years of observation and the hundreds of years of observation from those who came before me.
Right,
but
so I guess the question I want to ask you is the how.
Is the how. Yeah. And before I answer, I just want to raise this other provocative question. I challenge you to ask any scientist why gravity works. They don't know.
No.
They don't know. And yet it's essential to our ability to be on this planet, right? But scientists, there was an article about, I think it was a year or two ago, where they were just saying we really don't know why it works. But we can assess how it works, and we know what the result is, which is that we don't go flying into space when we get up in the morning, right? Our feet are presumably on the ground.
Right.
Okay. So so planetary patterns and the headlines. So when you first start, you start learning about astrology, they learn their sun sign, I'm a Cancer, and that means I'm sensitive and I like food or whatever, they learn these basic things. Then maybe they start becoming aware that there are a lot of moving parts to the natal chart. And so that's interesting. There's the moon sign, because the sun and the moon are the same size from planet Earth. So you better take that moon into consideration. That's the astrological symbolism. Why is the sun and the moon the same size from our perspective when they're really not? That's a deep question.
Yes.
Okay, so back to the news. So But astrology applies to everything. You have a horoscope. It's like Oprah with her cars. You have a horoscope, and your daughter has a horoscope, and your cat has a horoscope, and a company has a horoscope, and a wedding has a horoscope, and a country has a horoscope, and a moment in time it's like looking at the two analogies I give. One, the weather patterns. If you look at your weather forecast, the meteorologist is there with all of these shifting whatever squiggle lines, and you're not a meteorologist, so you have no idea what those pressure areas mean. But that meteorologist can tell you if you need a sweater or an umbrella. So that's one analogy for looking at the movement, the cycles, the planets. That's what astrologers can do by studying these symbols that we have created. We have created these. It's wild. The other analogy is cycles upon cycles. Everybody is familiar with the lunar cycle, especially women, right? You've got a new moon. The sun and the moon come together. Everybody knows we're going to plant seeds. Then there's a first quarter moon. Then there's a full moon. We're going to have some illumination. Maybe there's potential release. What's stuck of the seeds that are planted. Then there's a third quarter moon. What are we going to harvest? And then everything goes fallow and we start it all over again. Every pair of planets does this little dance at various duration. Some, for the moon, the sun, the moon, it's about 28 days. But there are all these other things. So it's like looking at the back of a watch. It's like looking at clockwork. And the astrologer is looking at all these little cogs clicking, clicking, clicking. And their client shows up, and the astrologer turns the watch over and shows them the face of the watch and says, this is what time it is. Yes. This is the time now to do blah. This is the time now when we're going to have something. So with respect to the headlines, I used to work in news. I wasn't a reporter. I was the person who promoted the news. Like what's the top story of the day? And I'd started writing this forecast because a woman that died, Rocky Gardner, if you lived in Los Angeles, a couple decades ago, Rocky Gardner wrote this forecast through the Village Voice in LA Weekly called Rocky Horoscope. And she would write about, this is the energy of the day. Not what's going on in your horoscope, but this is how the day is going to roll. Amazing. Well, the stories that I was promoting were reflecting the potential expression of those patterns. For example, President Biden just gave the State of the Union speech. We're recording this on February 9th. The State of the Union was on February 7th. What's he going to talk about? What's he going to present? With my understanding of planetary patterns that day, I could make a statement several days beforehand that his focus was going to be on cooperation, reaching across the aisle. No doubt in my mind. And it was so cool because right before that speech began, the Washington Post ran a headline, Biden will challenge the other party to work with him.
On the other hand, knowing who he is, wouldn't you kind of deduce that anyway?
Well, that's also, well, yes, that is who he is, because he's a great backroom dealer, and his objective is to build something materially secure, and that's what he needs to do. But the fact that the Washington Post headline mirrored what I had said in the perspective of the planetary patterns, to me, is something. And the fact that I've been doing this for over a decade, where you will see words show up in, all of a sudden words will be really hot, and they will be reflecting the planetary patterns. There's been a lot of talk by the time this Mars were probably, the energy Mars, the energy of action and aggression, has been in the sign Gemini, which refers to words, right? It's been there since mid-August, and it won't leave until March. And this is a really long time for the planet that represents assertion and courage and aggression to be in one sign. So what I and other astrologers who do this were able to accurately anticipate is that we were going to see a lot of words being used as a weapon. And even the word weaponization has evolved into our consciousness right now. And that, to me, is a direct reflection of the, like, now is the time for us to be dealing with this, to be focused on this. It's amazing.
It is amazing. Well, we know that Reagan consulted astrologers, and we don't know if Biden does or not. But you brought my attention to another one of our presidents, Woodrow Wilson, and you say that there was a headline in the New York Times in 2013 that says astrology explains the headline, and I saw this as like crazy. Woodrow Wilson, stud muffin. I've heard our 28th president called a lot of things, a college professor, who's a war leader, who's a racist, but stud muffin?
Stud muffin? Oh my God, I love this. I am so happy you asked me this question, and I'm so happy you read that intro paragraph on my website. Thank you. Okay, so yes, Woodrow Wilson, stud muffin. So when I first started writing about the news, the conceit was, because I live in New York, the conceit was, can I use astrology to anticipate what we're going to see on the homepage and the headlines of the New York Times? That was and I was really scary, because I would make a prediction and of what kind of story I thought we were going to see, and then I would just hold my breath, and then it would happen, and it would be like, oh my God, I'm gonna do it again, and so you just keep doing it. And so, but this, eventually I started looking at why people make news at certain times, not just the headlines themselves, like the Washington Post headline, which was stating, reaching across the aisles, cooperation, exactly what was going on astrologically on February 7th. Woodrow Wilson. I just thought, what the heck is going on in his horoscope? Because that headline did not make any sense with the planetary patterns on that week. And so I said, I got to look at his horoscope. Now, Woodrow Wilson is dead, right? Very dead, very much so, not here. But when I went and looked at his horoscope, on that day, what had happened was Maureen Dowd, who's one of the op-ed columnists for the New York Times, had dinner with Woodrow Wilson's latest biographer, and it was this fabulous book, and everybody loved it. And Leonardo DiCaprio was going to option it, and they were going to make a movie of it. And Woodrow Wilson was just like the hottest thing since sliced bread. But she said, we found ourselves talking about his steamy love letters to Edith Galt. Okay, you're like, ooh, really? They couldn't believe it for the same reason. And so I'm looking at his horoscope. What the heck is going on? Well, yeah, I mean, there's a pattern in Woodrow Wilson's horoscope that says he was quite the hottie. He had to be supercharged in rather unusual, disruptive, innovative ways. And that particular pattern, on the day that Maureen Dowd was talking about it and writing about it, suggested that his sexuality, his innovative, disruptive sexual expression, and his communication, because that was very important. He's going to be known for from his thoughts, his mindset, was going to be given gravitas. Huh. And this was the first time, I think about the first time. And then what's mind blowing about this is that he's dead, but his horoscope is working in the same way that somebody who was alive was worked. And so then I was looking at it to see, well, where is this going to go from here? Is that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio going to get made? And what I deduced was, whatever happens, his image and how he thinks and how people think about how he thinks is going to change dramatically over the next few years. And it did, because all of a sudden people started looking at what he had supported when he became president, which was to segregate the civil service. He thought it was too soon for the civil service to be integrated. It was one of the first things he did. And we started to look at the way he needed to think in a new light, and his reputation and his status suffered.
Mm-hmm.
But, okay, great. But we can use astrology to anticipate this change in someone who's not even here to make choices. What are we looking at when we look at a horoscope?
What is it?
I don't know why, but I know how, and I know how to use it as a tool for understanding why you are the way you are and why things happen when they do.
Well, Elizabeth, one of the things that's also being talked about in astrology, I guess for at least the past year or so, is the reemergence of Pluto into the astrological realm.
The Pluto thing.
Right. So, why does this little planet have such an influence now?
Well, think about what Pluto is in Greek mythology and Roman. I mean, he's the lord of the underworld. He's ruthless. Resistance is futile. You cannot escape. But I have a feeling you might be talking about Pluto has gotten very people. Are you asking about the U.S. Pluto return?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the U.S. Pluto return. Let's explain what that is. Okay. So we talked about cycles, right? So it takes roughly 28 days for the moon to do its little dance and come back up to the meet up with the sun. All right, fine. It takes a year from the day you were born for the sun to go all the way around your horoscope. And then on your birthday, the sun is sitting on top of your sun at the time you were born, right?
Right.
Sun does it in a year. It takes Pluto 248, Pluto has a weird orbit, but roughly 248 years to go all the way around a horoscope and come back to its place at the time the entity or the person, whatever it is, was birthed. So a human being is not going to experience a Pluto return. We have Saturn returns. Some of your listeners may know what that is. Every 29 years, Saturn comes around and everybody has to get serious. But okay, so Pluto isn't going to come around in a person's horoscope, but in the horoscope of a nation, it does. And the United States, because it is a young nation, born in 1776, had never experienced this before. So there was a lot of buzz about that. However, I think the buzz was overhyped because they're thinking, oh, Pluto refers to composting and breakdown and death and transformation. Okay, fine. But remember what I was talking about, the lunar cycle: new moon, first quarter moon, full moon, third quarter, back to the beginning. The United States, horoscope of the United States, has experienced Pluto at a first quarter position to where it is, like if it was a first quarter moon, and an opposition. So Pluto has been opposite the Pluto in the US horoscope, and it's been at this 90-degree, the image you should have as a first quarter or third quarter moon. There's tension there.
Right.
So we can look at those times because we lived through them. And we can see, well, what happened? And then you talked about Ronald Reagan. So he's going to come up in this story. Okay. So the last time we had the equivalent of the third quarter moon from transiting Pluto, making this 90-degree square to the Pluto in the US horoscope, was in 1980 to 83, thereabout. Because Pluto moves very slowly, so it can take a year and a half for it to finally do its full circuit that it's going to do. So what happened back then? Well, any economist or historian like, Heather Cox Richardson will tell you that in the early 80s, there was a shift in power and resources, which is what Pluto represents, power and resources. There was a shift. Ronald Reagan was elected, and we started to move away from the New Deal policies that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had espoused back in, you ready for this? 1936-37, which is when we had Pluto opposite Pluto in the US horoscope. So we've been through 2 cycles where we saw a dramatic shift in the balance of power and resources in the economy of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we went from New Deal in the 30s to the early 80s. We go to trickle-down economics. Pluto is coming back to a focal point. It is reasonable to expect that the balance of power is going to change, because that's what's happened before. That's how we use astrology. We know what happened before.
So that's when we use it. We can see these patterns and we understand the patterns. We can then look at what's going on and determine what's going to happen.
What's likely to happen?
What's
What's
likely to
likely to
right,
happen, and
because
help you manage.
there's
Yeah,
always that if factor that,
yeah.
who knows?
I
Well,
mean, Pluto also refers to nuclear power. Okay, so it just, but
right. But given all of that, and given that, in the past couple of years, things have really been topsy-turvy. I mean, we had the pandemic and, we've got the war in Ukraine and, inflation, all kinds of things going on that, keep us tense and in a large sense. What does astrology say about what's going to happen for the rest of this year?
okay, another fabulous question. So I would take you back to the end of December 2020. There was a pattern that made a lot of news. Jupiter was really close to Earth, and Saturn was right next to it. Jupiter and Saturn, their little cycle is 20 years. They meet up every 20 years. And you can track economic cycles by tracking the technical term is conjunction. When they meet up, their synodic cycle is the technical term for astronomers would use this, the synodic cycle. They come together, they have a focal point. Okay, they came together at the very beginning of Aquarius. You can all start singing the age of Aquarius. Okay, they came together in Aquarius. Do, 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 do. Okay. And what was hugely significant about that is that for the past 200 years, this series of conjunctions, these business cycles, the meetups, were in predominantly Earth signs, like Taurus or Capricorn or Virgo. So for the past 200 years, the people who were driving the bus were the ones who were mining the earth, having the most toys. Now we have this dramatic shift that starts with these 2 planets coming together in air, a new era, A-I-R-A. So that shifts the economics, because the people who are going to be the top of the heap are the ones who can control air sort of things like networks, data, information, and how we think about things. And we're seeing that particular pattern that happened on December 21st, 2020, big bright star in the hub, is going to be activated by our friend Pluto next month. Next month, Pluto goes into Aquarius in March. And as it does so, it's going to be at the first degree of Aquarius. So if you looked on a map back on December 21st, 2020, Jupiter and Saturn would be right here. And now in 2023, Pluto is sitting right on top of it. And so that's how astrologers visualize on paper, something is going to happen. There's going to be action. There is tension here that's going to affect change. So this year, we're going to see a couple of things. Number one, we're going to see a focus on bringing this new economic paradigm into continuing to bring this into fruition, as the people who control information, data, and networks will be tussling with the people who've been mining the earth, like your fossil fuel companies and stuff. All right. And they're not going to go gracefully into the night.
Right.
So we're going to see it. We're going to see that tussle. But I think we're also going to see some pretty uplifting, positive, forward steps that are more preserving of the status quo so that the planet can sustain itself. I don't think it's going to be as super heavy as it was last year or years before.
That is very hopeful news. And on that note, we do have to come to a close. But
okay,
one final question: How can people find out more about you and your work?
You can find out more about me. I have a podcast that I do with an actual journalist. You can find it on my website, which is elisabethgrace.com. You can also find me at graceastrology.com if you can't spell my name, which is with an S, not a Z. So you can go there. I have a forecast that lays out expectations for the week and shows you what we're going to see in the headlines and why things happened when they do. And then I also have a podcast every week with my co-host, Whitney McKnight, an actual journalist, and we break down the news and put it into astrological perspective.
Oh, that is.
And I consult. I mean, I help you figure your life out too, because that's super fun.
We've been speaking with Elisabeth Grace all about what we can learn from astrology. I hope you've enjoyed today's program. If so, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Until next time, this is Debbie Spector-Weissman saying, sweet dreams, everybody.